Join us by the fireside for our evening tales of true life's strange experiences with things that lie beyond the veil of the known and into the misty depths of the mysterious and unknown.
Something in the Moonlight. It was in the year 2010, and at that time there was going to be a blood moon. So I rounded up a bunch of equipment to get a good picture of it. I just love the moon, and many of my favorite times in my life have been under the light of the moon. So I borrowed this, great camera, really good quality, that could be attached to a telescope. And I had my laptop and various other equipment that I needed. But I also took my pistol with me because there are mountain lions and coyotes in the area. So, just in case. So I loaded all my gear into my Jeep and I proceeded to head to an area a few miles away from town. So I got to the place where I'm going to set up all my equipment, and I began unloading and setting everything up. And all of a sudden, I heard some nearby sheep start to freak out. I didn't think much of it, and after a handful of minutes, they just went quiet again. Just as I was unloading the scope, I heard a very loud splash. Basically, the layout of this land was kind of pasture and creek where I was, and then sort of cornfield. And for some reason, this kind of caught my attention. And, this sort of very loud splash. And I stood up, and so I just sort of looked towards the creek for a second, but, I didn't hear anything else. So I went back to just setting up my scope. Now I heard some rustling and some twigs snapping and that sort of thing. And I stand up and I shone my flashlight around to see what I could see. I didn't see anything, and whatever it was went just quiet when I shone the light around. So I figured, I'd probably scared it off. And I just started screwing the scope onto the tripod when I heard a very loud snap and whipped back around. I pulled out my gun and I shone my light towards a fallen tree that I'd sort of noticed earlier. And there it was. It was roughly the size of a bear, but the head was kind of more canine-like, more dog, rather than bear, and the body was kind of more lean. We kind of just stood there staring at each other for what felt like forever. And then it growled and charged, and I screamed and fired my gun repeatedly. After the fact, I found I'd fired 8 shots. It bowled me over, and I fully expected that my life was just over, and that was it. But instead of following through with, the attack that I thought it would, it just kept running and it disappeared into the cornfield. I was thoroughly spooked, and I tossed the most expensive bits that I'd unpacked back into the Jeep, and I just left immediately, only going back once the sun was fully up to finish just recollecting the rest of my gear. When I got there, I found a game warden and a couple of sheriff's deputies and the farmer that owned the field pasture. Apparently, whatever it was had killed a couple of sheep, and they were trying to figure out what it was and where it went. The tracks were both canine, but also not canine. They were strangely kind of longer than a standard dog print. What was it? I'm still not sure. And sometimes it just keeps me up at night wondering, what the hell was this? Some have suggested that it was a dog man, but I'm not sure. And, I'm wondering, was it a werewolf? What is this? And I'm not sure I believe in such things, but at the same time, I know what I saw. And it was definitely not fully human and not fully animal. It was kind of a combination of both. Yeah, I'm not quite sure what the difference is, between, I guess a werewolf is a wolf, dog man just probably looks more like a dog. and part dog, part human. So I don't know. It's kind of interesting. I'm not sure what the difference is in their behavior. Is one more aggressive than the other, for example? That's kind of interesting. Certainly a pretty terrifying experience, I'd say. The suicide. I don't often tell this story in my adult life anyway, but it's absolutely true, and my mom can, vouch for it. When I was a teenager, I went to boarding school. After the winter holidays, a family friend of ours, around the same age as I was, committed suicide in his family home. My mom drove the 5 hours and back to pick me up from school and take me to the services, even though I didn't really know the kid. I mainly just knew his older brothers and mom, but no real connection to him. So I just want to reiterate that I only met this guy a handful of times. So after I dropped off back at school, I started experiencing these weird headaches that I never get headaches like that. And I initially just coughed that up to just a migraine or something. Unfortunately, it got so bad that I had to go to the infirmary for an overnight stay. Here's where it gets really weird. Once I was able to catch some sleep, I began to have these strange lucid dreams. In the dream, I was still in the infirmary and in the same room, but the place kind of looked like an unfinished garage. I was walking around and I called for assistance when I encountered the kid who had just committed suicide. I looked at him and he looked at me, wearing all white, and I asked him, why? And he goes, you know why. Okay, I'll admit I'm not sure why I asked why. I think it was a why for many things, like why are you here? Why me? Why did you do it? But his answer said a lot, even though I couldn't explain why or how. I immediately woke up crying and sort of sweating a bit. About 2 days later, my mom called me and she told me that people from home are seeing a psychic to try to cope with the loss. She then took a serious tone and said that she had something to tell me. Before she could speak another word, I immediately burst into tears, telling her about my dream and how it felt so real. Then my mom's voice just started to tremble, and she went into her reason for calling. My mom's friend, apparently, who is the mother of the then girlfriend of the kid who committed suicide, went to the said psychic, and the psychic mentioned that he visited me. Even my mom's friend was kind of perplexed because even she knew I had little to no connection to this kid, other than meeting a few times in passing, and notably, he made me laugh, literally every time. So, anyway, I guess the psychic must have told mom's friend that the kid had always had a crush on me, but felt there was never a good opportunity to connect with me. She said that he visited me during the night. I have no idea how this unexplainable coincidence happened, but it made me believe in the other side. The smirk he gave me after he said, you know why, was, in retrospect, discernibly flirty, but I just chalked it off as him being funny, as I didn't know I was dreaming. I never tell people this fascinating experience because I tried once and I could tell I sounded ridiculous. I'm glad I can just put it here and maybe someone will appreciate it as long as you can believe it. The medium's vision. This kind of happened to me between about 2006, 2007, and it was in the summer. My family and friends live pretty remotely in the middle of nowhere near woods, trails, and cornfields. During school, my friend told me about how her family decided to join a new religion, whatever that meant. She explained that her family went into a big city to speak to a religious medium who can see stuff that we can't. She told me that this medium knew that there was a trail that led behind her house and knew there was a cornfield mixed in with the woods as well behind her home. There was nothing really spooky about that as such, but it seems pretty common knowledge given the area. Well, the medium also told her that there is a demon extraterrestrial mytho type of creature that manifests itself behind their home in the woods. And it does this around 3:14 a.m. in the morning. And it tries to communicate through my friend, and that this is why she has chronic hiccups. Now, of course, when she told me all of this, I didn't buy into any of it, and I thought it would be a perfect opportunity to scare my other friends, who were girls in my class. We were all friends, but I liked one of the girls, and that part is irrelevant to the story. Anyway, so I went and explained the story to two of my friends, and we decided we would go out to the woods that night behind my other friend's house in hopes of seeing this creature, this demon, or whatever it was. The girls drove their car over to my house because we could walk to the trails from my house with no problems at around 2:30 a.m. It took us about 15 minutes of walking to get to the location. The way this trail forms is a little bit spooky because the trees kind of hooked over us, forming a kind of tunnel of leaves and limbs. It was really clear that night, and the sound of insects and wildlife was very loud, so it wasn't that creepy. So time passed, and we were sort of sitting around on the ground, and one friend was playing on her flip phone, and the girl I liked was talking to me. So 3:14 a.m. just sort of rolls around, and I decided to start throwing, stones and rocks and things into the cornfields, and I'm kind of taunting whatever it is to come out. So I'm throwing stones and stuff into the woods and the cornfield. Then about 5 minutes pass, and we decide to head back. No longer did it take for me to stand up and take 3 steps. And I'm not kidding here. Everything around us just suddenly got dead silent. There were no crickets chirping, no movement. Then, out of the blue, about 6 feet in front of us to the right, a large branch just snapped in two, and we heard the most ominous growl I have ever heard in my life. I've lived here my whole life and hunted. I have never heard an animal sound like that. By the sound of the limb snap, we fully expected to see something step out of the brush and greet us, but nothing did. The girls jumped behind me, and we just stared at the spot for a solid minute, trying to comprehend what it was. We couldn't see anything. It was pitch black, and our little flip phones didn't have the flashlight like these new phones have. I took a few pebbles on the ground and I threw them in the direction of the noise. Nothing. I decided it wasn't worth the risk of the girls' safety to head the direction we came, so I told them to run the other way and I'll lag behind, just in case if it's a predator that likes to chase. It'll get me first. As soon as they took off, absolutely nothing followed us. We managed to cut through the woods and onto a road that led by my house. We got back home around 4 a.m. To this day, I have absolutely no idea what it was. We decided to go back a year later and nothing occurred again. But I still hear this growl in my head and it just sends chills down my arm. Well, perhaps that medium was right. And maybe what they saw in the vision really is lurking around in those woods. An old criminal dies. So we had this old offender who was pretty close to gone. He'd been in the hospital at least a week, and it was a miracle that he had held on for this long, to be honest. He was really afraid to die, and he was fighting it. And he was at the point where he was only receiving comfort care with a DNR the family had signed. Sometimes when someone is about to go, they have this look to them, even in unconsciousness, and you just know. He had been out for something like 2 days, sleeping in a fog of medication as his body just slowly gave up. So it's somewhere around midnight, a little after maybe, and suddenly this guy woke up, but he was just staring at the ceiling, and right off, he did not look okay. He looked really terrified. His eyes were moving like he was sort of looking at something. And every so often, he'd whimper just a little bit. It was a quiet little sound, and it just sort of filled the room. It was so creepy. So I was in there with two nurses, and we were watching him die. And he was watching something that we couldn't see. Finally, he was gone. And just at that moment when he left, the sink tap just came on with nobody near it. None of us were close enough to get to the sink without moving. And with the room layout, no one in the hall could touch it either without coming into the room. And there's just no sneaking to it. Now, I'm generally skeptical about the paranormal, um, but something about this, really got to me. I mean, there's a ton of things that have happened in that hospital and prison that have made people clutch their pearls and flutter about ghosts. I'm not sure what to believe, but that said, I've seen a few things that will forever make me question the validity of an afterlife. But, it's once you have an experience, you do wonder. I'd be curious to know what he was accused of. I mean, did he kill someone? What was his offense and how serious was it? Because that might make a difference as to what kind of experience um, and greeting he's getting when he leaves his body in death, when he dies. So that would be kind of interesting to know because it certainly sounds like it wasn't something good that he was seeing.